Ready anyway.
Eccoci all'ultima conferenza di share. Poi vi invito, non andate via subito, ci scambiamo i saluti finali e ci beviamo un bicchiere di vino, ma questo dopo. Adesso ascoltiamo la conferenza finale, un po' il momento topico anche conclusivo, no, di tutta questa settimana di Share Festival. Bruce Sterling e Marcos Novak. Grazie.
So, this is the very last share event. I can't tell you what joy it gives me to say that. Marcus, Dr. Novak, and I are batting cleanup. We're doing the very last piece here. We know that we are standing between you and the aperitivo. As soon as we're done, you all get to flee. So we will try to keep it lighthearted. I'm glad that we're ending this with a real burst of good old-fashioned cyberspace, visionary, ranting weirdness. And it's going to be hard to beat Marcus Novak in supplying that. Do you have something you'd like to show us first, Marcus?
Well, yeah, I am.
Okay.
I think we can.
Let's get the appalling visuals out of the way first.
Appalling visuals. Yeah. All right. Okay, I'll put something else up there.
No, those are good. I'm enjoying the prospect of being appalled.
Well, it is supposed to be appalling. All right.
Well, what is it then?
Well, no, you start.
Does it run? Does it wriggle? Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right, I'll stop.
I can distract everyone if you like with other things. So.
No, those are gorgeous. All right. Well, the topic of our discussion, such as it is architecture as atoms and bits, and this is a formulation that was made very famous, mostly by Dr. Nicholas Negroponte of MIT Media Lab, it's a metaphorical distinction, and because bits don't really exist per se. Every bit that we see or manipulate is really a bit of an atom. I mean, bits are not mathematical abstractions like numbers. Bits are electrons, or they're a phase change in a laser signal, or they're a little pit cut into a plastic disc, a CD-ROM. I mean, they're physical objects. They're just physical objects. They're very small and difficult for us to see. When Negroponte made this distinction, he was trying to get people to think more usefully about what computers did. I mean, he was arguing that they would get faster and faster and become more and more capable and move more and more data more and more quickly, and eventually it simply made sense to talk about bits rather than atoms. And one of the themes of our conference this year has been that this division is breaking down. And I think it's breaking down not in a bad way, but in a kind of consummation of the idea. It's a kind of metaphor that has outlasted its lifespan and has to give way to some new way of thinking. And rather than be sad about that, I'd rather try and explore the sort of process of making these kinds of metaphors. Like, people who use the term cyberspace, are using a term which is already rather dated, still useful in some ways, but also becoming archaic and very much a formulation of the 80s and 90s. But we have other metaphors which seem to make tremendous sense to us at the time, like, for instance, the information superhighway, right? And if you can remember the information superhighway, it really seemed to make a lot of sense to people at one point. It's like, we're trying to move information long distances instead of a lot of information very quickly, and it's like, the internet is a series of pipes, and the government is going to supply the pipes just like it supplies the highway system, and the highway is fast, and I have a little road, and it goes to my front door, and it's my connection to the highway, and this is my address here where the highway reaches my address. All right, all that time, it was not really a highway. Nor is the internet really a net. I mean, if you go out and sort of look at the way the machinery, the data is being traveled across the world, quite a bit of it is sent wirelessly, some of it is sent by satellite, some of it goes under the ground, some of it is by microwave repeaters. If you sort of look for a net in the sense of like a bunch of ropes tied together, it's not there. In fact, it's becoming less like a net than it was. There's more connections, wireless connections to handheld objects. There's more autonomous connections between other objects. So it's not really a net. Nor is it a grid. Because, a grid is rectilinear and everything is supposed to cross at right angles. And it's, supposed to sort of cover the earth very neatly, like downtown Torino is a grid. But the internet is not a grid. And it's not a cyberspace. And if you go into a cyberspace, it's sort of a useful thing. This looks very spatial. There is no spatiality behind it. This is a screen. It's all simulated. There's no real space in there. You can't build a bathroom in there. There's no kitchens in there. It's pixels. I mean, it's like moving pixels on a flat surface. It's not really a space. Now, it's useful to think of it as a space. Like a movie screen looks like a space. You can have like a movie about outer space. And look, we're in outer space. All right, you're watching a movie. It's a metaphorical thing for a space. And neither is it a cloud, which is something that technicians like to talk about quite a lot now. I mean, technicians will scoff if you say, I have an address in cyberspace or something like that. It just sounds rather science fictional and corny. But then these same programmers will not hesitate to offer you the metaphor of the internet cloud. All right? It's not a cloud. I mean, there's no cloud, there's no rain, there's no fog in the internet. But it's less like a cloud than it's like a space. You might hear it called a second life. Okay. I mean, that's sort of a nice metaphor. If you're a programmer or a real tech head, you might see the internet strictly defined as devices that use the TCP/IP protocol. Because I have a sort of the original technical definition of the internet. You use the transfer control protocol, internet protocol, in order to connect network to devices. Okay, that protocol has changed a lot over a long period. IPv6 is not the same as IPv4, so even the technical definition of the internet doesn't strictly hold and can't combine all the things that we call the internet. So it's kind of slipped that definition too. So, I find that quite interesting. But then we have these metaphorical problems which are now beginning to bleed over into the atom world, like realities, right? Okay, virtual realities. I mean, what's a virtual reality? Well, that's an old-fashioned idea. Basically you just sort of wrap your heads in a set of sensors and remove your senses from the normal inputs, and now it feels like you're in another reality, but that's not really a reality. I mean, it's a kind of metaphorical reality. But then we've got augmented reality, where I'm using bits of data and projecting them out into actual reality. I put tags on things, subtitles on things, perhaps I label things, I have some kind of vision system. Now we're getting into what seems to me to be some really hairy kinds of conceptual territory, which really are about an architecture of atoms and bits. And we don't even have the proper I mean, not only do we not have the proper words for this, we're actually like damaging some of the words we already have. I mean, an augmented reality, ubiquitous computing. We've heard a lot about this. Okay, what's ubiquitous? I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking and writing about ubiquitous computing when I was in design school. I finally realized that the things about ubiquitous computing that are interesting is at first, it's not ubiquitous. And second, it isn't computing. And other than that, there's nothing wrong with those terms. And then we have the 3D web, which is sort of a supposedly third-generation web, which is going to have more 3D spatiality in it, and then can perhaps be sort of cross-bred onto other forms of 3D spatiality, like the kind we inhabit. And then you start moving into some really strange areas, like Rem Koolhaas's famous space of flows, right, in which he tries to define buildings and cities not as rigid structures, but as like methods to house the activity that goes through them. Or you have Adam Greenfield's new pamphlet, which is called "The City is There for You to Use," which is an attempt to redefine cities as information processing machines, right? And Adam Greenfield's central dogma is that we now navigate cities electronically. And primarily, we end up in the places where we go, stay, eat, sleep because of electronic mediation. Either the traffic signals have sent us there, we found it on Google Maps, somebody sent us an SMS message over our cell phones, we got email. In other words, the reason most of you are in this room, I'm quite sure, is because of some electronic interaction. I don't think you came in here because you saw the flag outside, which has, been consistently blown away by the wind. Maybe you saw a piece of paper, one of the newspaper coverage, or some other kind of physical prompting that brought you here. But probably most of you are here for electronic reasons. And Greenfield says eventually we'll all be here for electronic reason. Then you have other articles which I find quite troubling and interesting, like a famous Rem Koolhaas scholarly paper, which I believe he did while he was at Yale with some of his students, which is called "The Roman City as an Operating System." And I really think people who live in Roman cities, like the Turinese in particular, would derive a lot of benefit out of reading Koolhaas's paper, "The Roman City as an Operating System," because he really does try to define ancient Roman cities as commands over spaces of flows, like inputs, outputs, gates, fortresses, symbolic centers, marketing centers, a kind of ancient Roman e-commerce. And when you read this paper, you realize it actually makes a lot of sense to think of cities in this way. It's kind of dynamic flows of bits. And my question is, are we really likely to resolve this flurry of new words, new neologisms, and this sort of rapid death of old formulations, or are people like myself and Dr. Novak here going to remain very busy making up new, rather science fictional sounding terms in an effort to make some sense of what is happening to us? And I respect Marcus very much because he is a great coiner of new phrases and new combinations of older phrases, and just fresh ways of trying to grip this turmoil that we are in. Now, I don't think the turmoil can go away. It might be that we hit on some better language. What do you think?
Well, it's really, I like the way you framed it, and it's really interesting to have this talk at the end of the whole event, and then especially at the end of the previous session, and especially at the end of the little exchange at the very end between Nicole and Louis, and the nature, orthonature, paranature I spent the morning, being in Turin, and if you're in Turin, you have to see Guarini, and so I went to see San Lorenzo, and it's splendid. It's an amazing thing. I don't believe in that system. I don't buy into all that. I hope I'm not offending anyone. I'll get struck by lightning shortly, but it's still a splendid thing. Now, one of the things that Guarini is known for is that at some point he wrote a whole treatise against the heliocentric system. So we know he was wrong, He also left a masterpiece and then a few more scattered all over the place. So I don't know that resolving it any of this is really a question of arriving at a fact. I think I was also responding to the word earlier, a neologism, another neologism about biofacts, which sounds good, manufacturing, facting. And I couldn't resist saying, well, why not biopoems? I mean, that might be a little bit better because that also means to make, but it shifts the attention from the making of truth to the making of fiction, to the making of beautiful fiction that is concise and powerful and moving and productive, and not necessarily the truth, if there is such a thing. I don't even know that we would want such a thing. Now, that's one spin. I put this little thing on here, and the previous image that was there, that monstrous entity.
Excrescence, yes, entity, that's good.
Is actually in dialogue with Le Corbusier and the Maison Domino, which I also should put up, which was a sort of canonical modernist icon of what a modern building should be. And so that's a building. And that was actually in the Venice Biennale in 2004, and it was invited to be there at the end of a big show on the digital as the next step, which is exactly how it was intended. And the name of it, neologism, is allobio. Not parabio, not orthobio, allobio. And so I would toss into the conversation and return to, I'm sure, the notion of the allo, which is a Greek word which means other, but in English, I don't know, in Italian maybe it's different. In English you say other, and the microphone is other, the computer is other, you're other, everything's other. It's really indiscriminate. And you can actually make at least one more distinction of otherness, which is what kind of other. And so, Bruce and I are humans.
The other kind of other.
It's the other of the other kind. The other of the other kind is also, the allo is the root of the alien, of alternative, of else, as in if then else.
The Greeks took all the good words.
Hey,
this
man.
is really embarrassing, And the words that weren't taken by Greeks were taken by Latins. When you're working in English, you really have some difficulty. I mean, English is like the great scrap heap of language.
Oh yeah, but come on. I mean, if Aristotle could, he'd be saying okay all the time. Everyone in the world says.
Okay is actually African, I understand. It's like a West African loan word in English.
Or something like that. It's the president's nickname.
Yeah, well, maybe. I'm still a little
But maybe it's
on biofact.
So it goes back to Africa.
Yeah. There are people who do this for a living, ladies and gentlemen. I know that's hard to understand. It's like him, me, and Buckminster Fuller.
Well, that's good company.
It's excellent company.
Excellent
did you ever check out those guys' neologisms? They're amazing. He had his own private geometry, which is really good because he had sort of an anti-Greek geometry, which is full of things like tensegrity structures and tetrahedrons, and he considered these to be, the basis of real reality, as opposed to, the kind of reality that other scientists were taught. So,
but it got him to the Buckminster Fullerene.
It didn't get him to Buckminster Fullerene. One of the things he suggested, he was really trying to get people to understand that they don't live in three-dimensional space, that they live on the surface of the Earth, right? Because he was a whole Earth theorist. So he said that up and down, the word up and the word down in English are conceptually wrong, because that implies that we live on a flat plane, when factually we live on a sphere. So we should be saying in and out, because down is actually toward the center, and and down in Torino is not the same direction as down in Los Angeles. In fact, down in Torino and down in Los Angeles, strictly speaking, intersect. They intersect at the center of the earth. So he tried to get people to talk about going outstairs and instairs, right? Rather than like upstairs and downstairs. And I look at a formulation like that, and it reminds me of something like biofact or liquid architecture or cyberspace. I mean, it's like a heroic effort to solve, a problem, like a mental problem that we really have, and if you grant Buckminster Fuller the benefit of the doubt, you have to agree that, up and down are a remnant of Aristotelian thinking, and, they're sort of a kind of folk physics, and, in outer space there's no up and down.
There's no such thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was quite serious about it, actually, Buckminster Fuller, and at some point one night he walked into Lake Chicago and was going to sort of drown, and then decided that he wouldn't. And then he thought about what to do, and he decided two things. One was that it was going to take him 27 years to do what he wanted to do, so he got to work. And the other was that for a period of 2 years or more, he just didn't speak. He didn't speak to his wife, he didn't speak to his young daughter, he didn't speak to anyone because he didn't trust language.
Yeah.
He didn't, he figured that all the mistakes in his life had to do with speaking to other people, and so he wasn't gonna do that until he got it straight in his head.
Well, I think that was the period when he invented his own
probably
private
made
geometry.
his own words at the time.
I mean, he was really trying to get down to first principles and avoid this kind of historical crust of bad assumptions that we've inherited from thousands of years of pre-scientific thinking. He's a heroic figure, really, in many ways, Fuller.
So there's a reason why I've got this thing up here. And let's see if it's loud enough. Can we turn it up? Up. It needs to be loud. I'll let it run quietly. The other word I want to toss in, I tossed allobio. I'm going to use the allo again, and because you said getting to basics, and I think there's a way of, there's a reason why you make these words. I think there's a reason why I make them. I think that it's why Bruce makes them. I think why Buckminster Fuller and the words we've heard, and I think it's because we encounter a situation that we have a bad fit with, that we don't know how to handle. And so each word is in some way a rung, a step on a ladder. And we go up that ladder as far as we can, and then when we run out of things, maybe we reach down and take another one, which is dangerous, but we establish the next thing that we're going to try to pull ourselves up with. And so I think it's a genuine effort. I don't think it's silly. I think it's actually necessary. And that's why you come up with a term and then someone else actually uses it, because it's a useful thing. If I come up with a screwdriver, someone else finds something to do with it. And I think what's happening is that we've shifted our attention from whole things down to parts of things, which were called atoms, but we know too much to assume that an atom is fixed, because we discovered that we could break it apart, and we keep on breaking them apart. So the idea is good. We'll call it an atom temporarily. There's this philosopher. 2,500
years of temporary.
Yeah, it's that which can't be divided. So it's a temporary whole. But so I think we're looking, whether you're talking about atoms, molecules, cells, neurons, bits, just going on this way, you're talking about something that at some level is atomic, from which the world assembles itself. And we're figuring out how to do that pretty well. Now, I'm proposing a term called the alloatomic. So I'm using the atomic, but I'm using the allo, and I'm saying, okay, isn't it true that the locus of fiction, which will become fact or become poem or whatever it becomes, is now the invention of an atom that has the kinds of properties that we would like, so that you can invent the world, or rather, so that you can unleash it and let it assemble the world.
So that is an allo atom.
That could be an allo atom, and the effort, the kind of understanding that you would, instead of inventing, you write stories, right?
Yes.
Instead of writing the story, you would invent the atom of the story, and the story would then write itself. You would invent the DNA of something, and it would unfold.
So is it an actual atom, or is it just some kind of verbal construct that auto-assembles?
My proposition is that it's going to be both. That we've
my
seen.
God, no!
Well, yeah.
So all I need is literary competition from the submolecular level.
Watch out. Watch out. Let me stop with this thing. What could I show you? I've got things I could show you if you like.
Well, I'd love to see some of them.
Would you like to see some?
I'm always very interested in visual depictions of atoms, because as you may know, no one has ever actually seen an atom with the naked eye, because they're like too small to reflect visible wavelengths.
But you can see molecules and you can hear them. And you can see atoms.
You can see models of molecules, and you can hear, simulated audio output that's somehow associated with a molecule's property, but you can't actually see a molecule.
Strictly speaking, I'm seeing a model of Bruce Sterling sitting next to me.
I think there are models and there are allo models, but nevertheless, I mean, if you look, to talk about bits is very problematic, because as I was saying, we have these different regimes to describe like bits and methods of distributing bits and so forth. But I really think atoms have some problems too, because I don't think that they're. I mean, I agree that they are real objects and sort of more or less indivisible elements of reality, but the fact that we can't directly experience them means that we have this kind of metaphorical level between ourselves and atoms. Like if you look at pictures of atoms in textbooks on chemistry, for instance, they're usually depicted as bright, kind of platonic spheres in primary colors. Like a DNA chain is usually like white, red, blue, and maybe orange atoms. And they're either in sticks with little balls, or they're in sort of clouded, sort of segmented, round forms which are, welded together in kind of billiard ball-like segments. Okay? Those are like the perfect billiard balls in physics, or the perfect atoms in a perfect gas. And these perfect situations in science are conceptual. There aren't any perfect gases. There aren't any perfectly elastic billiard balls. I mean, real atoms are presumably real in some ways, and they have properties which are neglected by our metaphorical representations of them. Like, for instance, atoms rot.
Rocked?
They rot.
Rot.
They decay. Sure. Some atoms are inherently unstable, but you don't ever see an entropic atom. Like an atom in trouble, a damaged atom, a dirty atom.
Oh, but you do. But it's an unfair advantage. I concede that. But
you've got some dirty atoms to show us, Marcus.
No,
I'm definitely in the market.
I can't speak to the cleanliness of our audience, for instance. But this is a room to a Greek. This is a room full of atoms, because in Greek the word atom means indivisible. Atom, as in chemistry and so on, or physics. But an atom is also an individual, a person. You are an atom. I'm an atom. It doesn't have to be taken literally, and in which case, yes, we do decay. But this is why I've been careful to add the prefix, because I don't want the confusion with the literal chemical limited atom. And so I'm going to show this thing, for example. Now, this you can find it on YouTube. I think it's very, very charming, and I think it illustrates. There's a thing in logic about proof by existence, which is, you have a debate, it goes this way, it goes that way, I say there are aliens, you say there aren't aliens, I go out of the room, I come back, I bring in an alien, there it is. So here's a sense of an atom, that's not a literal atom, but it enables this to happen, and I think it's something we can learn from. Have you seen this?
Yes, I know what that organism is, but oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, he's a beautifully camouflaged cephalopod there.
Yeah, it's Mr. Octopus. So it's nice to see it backwards. Now, this is a proof of existence of things that can be done and are done, and we're watching them in nature. And they're done because this creature, it's nice, it has no bones, it has a beak, that's about it. It has a brain, but its brain is also distributed across its entire skin. So it can think with its skin, which helps, if you don't have any bones and you only have tentacles, it helps to be able to instruct each one to do different things. But on top of it, its skin itself is like a super sophisticated screen. So it has chromatophores, these cells and it's built of layers. The lower layer is reflective. Other layers have black and other pigments and so on, and they can squeeze and expand very quickly. And it can change colors like other creatures can. And on top of it, it can also change its texture. I would say that each of these capacities that it has are features of atoms, but alloatoms, not literal atoms as in the atomic, but features of the design of its constituent elements. And that if we wanted to be able to do something, now if we're talking about architecture, for instance, if you wanted to do something, you would have to stop thinking that there are walls and floors and ceilings and planes and all the kinds of geometric solid things that we know, and you'd have to say, well, what would be an interesting atom? Not a literal atom like this, but what would be an interesting element from which I could infer different things. And if I could do that, then the room could become metamorphic like this thing, and maybe there wouldn't need to be cutouts for windows, because the whole wall could become transparent where it needs to become transparent. And then you begin to realize that, well, we said a lot of those things in that old-fashioned thing called virtual reality. But now we're finding out how to bring it into space. If we understand this, which we're getting to, it would mean the kind of metamorphic reality that we see in virtuality becoming actual. It's not accidental. I think it's actually totally telling that the two things, well, the two of the prizes yesterday had to do with exactly this. How does the computer creep out into space? Everybody wants that. I mean, that's the burning desire. We've had enough of dark screens and being, seated in the room. We want it out in the light. How are we going to do it?
I'm just wondering how a real estate agent promotes a house that's built on the principles of an undersea squid.
As a garden. The octopus's garden.
Squid acres, octopus gardens.
Squid acres, I like that.
Your house can squeeze through a hole this big around. Your house can change color. Your house is polpo. If your house, falls apart, you can chop it up and eat it as a salad.
This is what biology looks like up close. These are cells, and we're watching morphogenesis. We're watching how something goes through a process called gastrulation, and how something that used to be a single-cell creature eventually becomes us. And this is what it actually looks like. And if we really want to get serious about manufacturing, we've got to get our materials to do this. But then I'm going to argue that not only do we want to do that, but we want to take it a few steps further. Here's another one, because I think these are really good to see. And we tend to not know about them. I mean, you can find them. They're all on the net.
They do have a certain Christine Sugru aesthetic about them, actually.
Don't they? Yeah, they have.
It'd be easy to simulate.
Yeah?
We're going to see tons of stuff like this. It's kind of got an aesthetic. It's kind of a tech nouveau thing, really. It's very reminiscent of the early days of Art Nouveau when they wanted to go make, street lamps out of lilies and, subways out of turnips and
Well,
organic borrowing of form.
One of the large trends, I think, in human affairs has been a shift from representation to simulation to embodiment. And so that's why artificial life was necessary. It was the simulation step. We represented life, we simulated life. We're not done with any of it.
No, we're certainly not
It's going to continue.
No,
but definitely where we're going is trying to make it. We've built a virus. We're almost there building a bacterium, and we're trying to continue with that. So I've shown you this. Now let me just shift because I mean it quite. Oh well, I should make this go a bit faster because it actually you can see that from a soup of generality. It starts building organs, and it's going to become a Drosophila fruit fly, which is where we've learned a lot of these things, just by this kind of
churning. Yeah.
The churning, however, is actually coded. It's it's set off by a kind of very musical process that happens to be given in chemicals, but it's there nonetheless. What was I going to show you? I was going to shift. I'm going to these are all good things to throw into the conversation. So let me just make this the right size. That's good. If you were reading the news not so long ago, a couple of months ago, a month ago, not much longer, there was a story that was totally extraordinary. About a researcher in Minneapolis, I think her name is Doris Taylor, and then his group, Doris Taylor, who took the hearts of dead mice, decellularized them, put basically a chemical found in shampoo that washed away all the flesh from the heart, and left only its scaffold, a kind of jellyfish-looking thing. Then put stem cells on it and put it in a fluid and grew new cells. And then, so you're watching this. This is the heart. This by here it's been decellularized. Can I get to that? There.
Kind of like retrofitting a building. You're tearing the facade off of it and.
Well, yeah, but look at this though. I mean, let me just get to the right point here. Because it's just totally extraordinary. I mean, it is absolutely, it challenges just about everything you want, and it's not fiction. It happened, So they did this. Then, they grew the flesh back on the heart, and they fed it. 4 days later, it became a muscle and it started moving. So they put a pacemaker on it to give it the right rhythm. 4 days after that, they took the pacemaker off, and it was a pumping heart, a living heart from a dead rat. Now, then they were explaining, because I heard this also on the radio, and if you read this, it said, then if you in a couple of months, the previously dead cells would actually get replaced, so then there wouldn't be anything dead left. And the whole purpose of this is to replace our organs.
So did they actually transplant the heart back into a living mouse?
That's the whole point. That's where they're trying to bring it.
Do they have one that'll run? And will a mouse boot up that heart?
Well, it's a bit hard because you have to kill the mouse, take its heart out, and we don't know how to keep the mouse alive while its heart is being reconstituted.
Well, can't you just eviscerate another mouse and
Well, no, they're going to do it with a kidney or something that the mouse can spare. It's not useful if you kill it and then try to put it back in. You'd have to do the whole thing to the whole mouse, which I suppose you could.
I can't wait to see what Make magazine does with this. There's like an organ maker's bill of rights waiting in the ring somewhere, where we have all these self-educated hackers who are now going to be doing groovy things with simulated and replicated organs.
My other favorite is the Euplectella sponge, which is this thing. This is actually the sponge's skeleton. It's not. The sponge used to be like this, but it had spongy stuff around it. But when it dies and you strip the extraneous part, what you're left with is actually a really interesting structure. And there's all this analysis that gets done about how it comes into being, like how does the sponge make this thing. Sorry, it's a little hard to get to the right page, but I'm trying to show you the actual scientific papers because I don't want to be saying outrageous things that have no basis when the basis is actually right there to be found.
Well, scientific papers quite often say
yeah, okay. I mean, there's something, but at least these are made by instruments, and you look into it and you find that regular structure that looks very architectonic and could be used to make a tower, for instance, is actually made this way. So there is the geometry, but the geometry is actually softened. And if you get down to it, here's the kind of building that would result if you took it literally.
That looks very Norman Foster, actually.
Yeah. And there's the real thing.
It could be the Gherkin in downtown London.
Yeah, but then you get into the Gherkin. The deeper you get, the more intriguing it gets, because you wonder, well, how did that Gherkin come into being, and how clumsy are we? Because we make things and we give up at some level of detail. If you look at the Eiffel Tower, it's really interesting. It has a big form, and then it's got these members, and then you look at the members, and they're all made of sub-members, and it goes, I don't know how many levels deep. Maybe Louis has counted them, but at some point it gives up. So finally you can make the Eiffel Tower out of pieces that are not much bigger than my pen. They're probably about that big and about so thick, and the whole thing is made of these. It just goes on.
Instead of made of toothpicks right down. It's toothpicks all the way down.
It's toothpicks all the way down. It's actually spiculae all the way down. There are these things called spiculae that this is made of. But so you follow this thing all the way down.
A fractal Eiffel Tower, basically.
No, but watch this though. Look, I really, this is called biofabrication, and this is biosilica, and the thing is actually made of glass. So it's a nature-forming glass, and it's made by seeping out of itself. So each level kind of pushes out of itself and then hardens. And
so is it like a very pure silica?
No, I suppose if it were pure, it would be more fragile. I have a feeling that imperfections are.
Is it pure enough to run Linux on? Is what I'm trying to...
But good. That's where we want it to go. That's exactly where we want it to go. I think that's where this becomes fun. Because so far it's entertaining, but it's not.
Well, if you can grow pure silica, you ought to be able to grow, electronic silica that can conduct things.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's where we really want this to go. We're actually making something atomically, but the atoms are made such that when they reach a certain level of complexity of assemblage, they can connect to the internet, whatever that means. They can pick up satellite signals for GPS. Radio frequencies.
Molecules, you mean?
When they assemble correctly, they become responsive. We didn't always have the senses we had. When we were amoeba, we didn't have a third dimension, and we certainly didn't have an information dimension. We had no mind for it.
So are you telling me you can make like a server or a router that's like microscopic?
It wouldn't be called a server or a router.
But it would perform other things that, a normal internet node would have. I mean, you could put like your live journal on it or whatever.
It wouldn't be so it would do the future version of that would be sufficiently more complicated and more interesting than that. To insist that everything behaves in the ways of a primitive attempt at communication, which is what we have.
I'm not claiming that it would run today's internet, but it's just the idea of an internet actually running on a microscopic level is like rather intriguing. I mean, there's a great Cory Doctorow or Charles Strauss story in that. Absolutely, for sure. On the subject of scientific papers saying, outrageous things, I have to bring up a subject in atoms, which is, dark energy and dark matter. Now, it used to be that if you were going to talk about atoms and bits, you had bits, and they were sort of mathematical and abstract and very information theory, and then you had atoms, and atoms were solid, and they were the real world and the virtual was that and the actual was this, and you had this kind of Bishop Berkeley argument, you know, that like real things are real and by golly I'm going to put my faith in all these real things. But then when you have scientific papers that claim that atoms, you know, in material structure, everything we can see is 4% of the universe, and when most of the universe is dark energy or dark matter, that's very perturbing. I mean, it's just like, it means that this kind of thing, this sort of rock solid aspect of existence, which we have taken to be the real and the actual, is a small fraction of what's actually going on in the universe. And we don't have any good terms for dark energy or dark matter, or what it does, or what its role is, whether it's important, or whether it's what it's doing to support the atoms, or whether the atoms are an important part of the universe, or just some kind of froth or epiphenomenon on you know, the 70 or 80% of existence that's unknown to us and not there. You know, I find that problematic. I mean, it kind of destroys the natural binary of atoms and bits. You know, if atoms don't matter and it's really dark energy and dark matter that are important, where's like the dark bits?
Well, here's the thing, you know, and I think you have to be really, really careful when you say anything in the West, and we happen to still be in the West, and not only that, the rest of the planet is now the West, you know. So, you know, because we've spread this kind of idea, and you know,
well, this isn't like a metaphysical argument. It's like, you know, it's like you can tell it from the shape of galaxies.
It's a hugely metaphysical argument, and it goes back to someone, you know.
No, it's a physical argument, not a metaphysical argument.
Well, I would keep it physical, but it is a metaphysical argument, and I'll point it out to you. You know, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Descartes, but he put in our head this idea of a division of the mind and the body, which also goes back to another, you know, person we owe a lot to, but is also problematic, Mr. Plato. You know, and there's this thing in the West, and it gets picked up by religion, it gets picked up by politics, and it shows up again and again of a division between the mind and the body. So it used to be mind and body, and now it's atoms and bits. You know, and the bits of the body and the atoms are better.
Right.
Or is it the other way around?
Yeah.
And the problem is that the division is the issue. I mean, you have to erase the division. We know that light is actually wave and particle. It's the disjunction that's the problem. You don't need to say or. You have to figure out when. Sometimes things are atoms and sometimes they're bits, or maybe they're both.
You know, I'm wondering seriously about the both problem, because, you know, I wrote this theory book, and the theme of our conference has been, you know, manufacturing and trying to like make virtual processes actual, to try and get beyond the screen and look at, you know, new digital manufacturing processes, or perhaps, you know, microscopic biological kinds of information-driven kinds of assemblage. And I've been thinking a long time, really, about what the endpoint is in that. I mean, suppose that the things we had, real objects, really were all digitally manufactured, and that they really were kind of saturated with bits. And we no longer made that distinction at all. I mean, Donald Norman talks about this in Design of Future Things, and, you know, Julian Bleecker has talked about this in his Manifesto for Networked Objects, and I talked about it in my book Shaping Things, and, you know, I made up a neologism called SPIME. But, you know, I'm just wondering what it would be like to live in an environment where most things that we had and owned were linked to the network and digitally manufactured. And I suspect that if we really lived in that kind of world, the things that we have would look much more frail than they do now, for one thing. I mean, they would be dematerialized to the extent that we could push them. They'd be very lightweight, they'd be recyclable, and they'd be frail because they're just printouts of a support system. We'd know that we were able to get a new one. We'd know we'd be able to just trash the old one and have it folded back in. So we're kind of getting into a Werner Panton world where things are foamy and lightweight and cheap and easily dented and kind of, you know, throwaway hard copies. Maybe they'd look something like the one laptop per child. If you've seen this kind of thing. Well, you know, the one laptop per child is this beautifully designed little Negroponte object where he's trying to like export bits to the children of the world. You know, and it has help from some of the best designers and interaction designers in the world. But it's also like super cheap. I mean, it's kind of rugged and colorful. But, you know, just kind of imagine that the one laptop per child was the beau ideal of all objects in the way that, like, a Ferrari used to be or the way an iPod is now, you know. If all our material possessions, our clothing, our homes even, if we had fabricated homes, they'd have a kind of one laptop per child. Look, there'd be no branding on them because why put a crass brand on something when it can just communicate with the internet all the time anyway. It's just
because it might communicate better. But you know, I think also, you know, there are all sorts of really perishable things that I use all the time. They're in my fridge and they're called food.
Yeah.
You know, and I like them very much, and I wouldn't like them to be permanent or canned. You know, and they actually need to develop a certain way. And it turns out that if they're salmon, they can find their way around the planet somehow. They've got pretty complex behaviors, which actually makes them what they are.
I think maybe that's a good thing to think of them as not food, not that you eat them, but they're sort of consumables.
Well, they are. I mean, to us, they are.
I mean, physical objects as consumables are interesting because, you know, if you look at sort of the structure of stuff on the internet, web pages and so forth, they're kind of very malleable, they're very crisp, they're very frail, they kind of have an average lifespan of 40 days. Yet, you know, we're used to the web, and we're not like passionately devoted to a single page. I mean, maybe we're devoted to a service or a stream or something else like that. And if you imagine physical items becoming sort of more linked to the net, and if they sort of take on these kinds of, I don't know, where it ends up as a very odd kind of world. You know, I was asking Donald Norman these questions because it's really something that challenges me as a writer and a futurist. I would love just to have, you know, to write a few words, just a depiction of a world like that, which is convincing on a visceral level. I mean, not theoretical, not detached, but just really novelistic and realistic. You know, and it's, I mean, it's part of my struggle, and it's one of the reasons really that I curated this event.
Let me toss more wood in the fire.
They're about to start tossing corks in the next room. So
you want me to stop?
Well, one more beautiful intervention. Show us something to whet our appetites here. We've seen octopi. We've seen eviscerated rat hearts. We've seen biofacts. We've seen artificial items.
You want your appetite?
We've seen microscopic nano internet things. The audience's brain may be full now.
I don't think so. Come on. It's a smart audience. Come on. You have to compliment the audience. They're going to leave.
They're tough. Yeah.
No. One of the things, I'm at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and part of various things there. And one of them is something called the California Nanosystems Institute. So it's got nanotech in it. Another part of it has to do with virtual reality and this thing called the allosphere, which is a 3-story high sphere in which you can project virtual environments in the round with 3D sound and so on. And you wonder about how you would put such things together. And there's more. I won't list it all. But one of the conversations I've had there, because now my colleagues are you know, people who actually do this you know, for real, is someone named Luke Yeager, who's a molecular biologist, and he works with RNA, and he can snip it and re-sew it, and he can do various kinds of things with it, and he can isolate in RNA a right angle, and then instruct it to come together again in various ways.
That's
so
very
we've been
interesting.
talking about
Buckminster Fuller specifically said there are no right angles in nature.
Well,
so here we've got a guy who's actually inserted a right angle.
This is why I have these images here, because I'm not going to just say that.
We believe you.
I don't believe it. I don't believe anything. I don't believe anything. You see, what I believe is that I've had this conversation. We spoke about grammatical constructions that were the kinds of things you can compute. So what you're seeing here are these little gridded things that you can do on your laptop. And what you're seeing next to it are atomic force microscope scans of RNA being made into these particular forms. And you can see that it's not tidy, so, you know, it's true, but you can see that it's been assembled into these patterns. And the how of it is like right there. So these are the exact chemical sequences and the exact locations.
You'll notice they're in bright primary colors and really clean.
That is a computer graphic. That is a computer graphic.
All
this is not
atomic
a computer graphic.
graphics look like that.
This is
all
not a computer
atomic
graphic.
Well, that part I believe. I
Well,
mean, this is what atoms really look like, and I'm convinced in reality
Okay,
they're
well,
kind of tattered,
here they
busted
are.
up, ugly, wet,
Here they are. You know, these are
blurry, distressed, used down market atoms.
So a closed tetramer, this thing, is this thing. This
Right.
is the symbolic form. This is the actual thing, scanned, as far as we can tell.
And those are right angles.
And those are right angles.
Yeah. And so how does this fit in with the giant sphere with the projection system inside of it?
Well, okay, let's fit that in.
I mean, besides the fact that they're both at your institution, do you actually use the giant sphere to help you engineer right-angled polymers?
I don't care to engineer right-angle polymers. I care to make things that don't exist. I don't care to make things that already exist. And I actually care not to have this
I mean
distinction
you
between...
in the plural at
between-
UC Santa Barbara.
Well, some
then.
people do, yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, let me just put some flesh on that thing. So there's something called the allosphere. You know, it has its kind of architectural history, like
Yeah, I remember
the
that. It's a
cenotaph for
famous
Newton,
monument, the
Boulez,
cenotaph for Newton.
you know,
yeah.
which was it could be day or night. It could show the universe. It could do all sorts of things. This is the actual section of the place, so you can see what it's actually made of. It's about 3 stories high, 3 tall stories high, with a bridge in the middle. Projections in the round. It's actually made of perforated metal, and it has speakers all over. And this is standing underneath it. So we're on the ground floor. We're looking up at the bridge. Up there is the 3rd story that's outside the sphere. It's perforated so that sound can come through it, and you can make 3D sound. And it's stereoscopic. You wear goggles, and you see what you see. And there's another picture. There's a picture with something projected on it, so you can see that when you project, it projects. It's hard to photograph. There's a scale
It's
picture.
big.
This is the human being in a sphere, and this is the human being in an allosphere, which is that it's an immersant who is scanned, video processed, sensed in some ways, whose information is melded with scientific visualization.
So the user is called an immersant, Marcus?
I'm calling it, If a user is
You
immersed,
called it immersant? You have made up the
actually,
term
Shar Davies
immersant?
calls it an
Okay,
immersant.
just checking.
What I'm interested in is this. Like, if you have all this apparatus, this is all it takes. This is the stuff it takes to return back to the user or the immersant or the person in this, and to construct something. So, and if you go to this trouble, why would you make Second Life as we know it, the program?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Why would you make anything like that? Why would you go to such trouble to recreate this?
You've knocked them into a cocked hat.
You wouldn't. So what I'm proposing is that if you instead invest in making something alloatomic, then meaning that if instead of making solid things, you invest in something that is made of particles that can be sound, that can be vision, that can be haptic, that can be computational, that can be sensory, that can be all the necessary parts, and then you let those things assemble, then you'll have pretty much a metamorphic universe.
That was just so great. You know, I don't think we could possibly top that, ladies and gentlemen.
I will. I'm not done. I'm just warming up, man. Now, I'll do it quickly, because I know...
The immersants are looking a little weary, Marcus.
All right. They'll be happy. I assure you, they'll be pleased.
Prepare to be translated into a right-angled tetramer universe.
No, I'm going to bring the universe out. I wouldn't, First, I've got to...
Universe is on demand, only at Share Festival. We bring you the best, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, come on, a universe the way your stories are universes. Bruce, come on, you're a fiction writer. You know what fiction is.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have to explain this to you. I might have to explain it to someone else. Okay, this is simply a mathematical function, but I want to show it to you because it's navigable. You know, it could be in the sphere, it could be in three dimensions.
Is this like a chaos iteration?
It's an iterated map of some sort, yeah. But the main thing is that I'm showing it to you because it's not solid. You see forms, but the forms aren't there. And it's important to show it to you as a living program because what you can't realize, if I don't do that, is how malleable this is. Even though I have no control over its overall form in a literal sense, it doesn't even exist as an overall form, it actually stabilizes into things that might become buildings or might become organisms or whatever we want them to be if we shift our attention from the solid to the making of things that are particulate. And this is everything that we're doing is particulate. So you just have to shift you say, okay, that's where my fiction will be.
So can you print that out as a .stl file and run it on like one of Provell's fabricators?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
Geez, you're really pushing me. But
no, I'd just love to see them.
All right. You asked for it.
Absolutely, man.
But I'll take you. That's sort of VR as we knew it. This is already four-dimensional, so it's not like 3D. These are projections of four-dimensional spaces that happen to be 3D because we.
Well, look at that.
But you can rapid prototype these things. You
can make them big. You made the big. Oh, wait. Is that a street light in the background there? Look at the size of that thing. It's like a Godzilla head.
You know, it's like an industrial. I used to teach industrial design, and there was this sort of thing that you said, like, make it good, like design it, make it good. If you can make it good, make it red. If you can make it red, make it big.
Yeah.
So there we are. Now this is actually important because that's a material thing, and here what I'm showing is that if you focus a couple of sensors, a couple of cameras, where they intersect is a region that you can actually identify in a particular kind of way. I'm not going to explain this; it's going to take too much time. I'm standing between you and your wine. This is the Venice Biennale. This is something called this is the echinoderm, which is biomathematical. It's like mathematics and plankton. This is that prototyped.
Awesome.
This is the same thing. The reason this is there is because at the end of the digital, and this is that thing as a building, all right.
This
as a
is
proposition
a building.
for a building that would not be built. It just gives up on the assumption of making things this way. It says, okay, it's all new materials, it's all nano stuff, it's all grown. It's not a biology, it's not a living thing, it's an allobio.
Right.
This is it, rapid prototyped, just a
looking kind of Greg Lynn there.
No, he couldn't do this.
Oh.
Period.
Poor Greg.
There's the family. Okay. There's mama, babies, and the warrior. This is a much bigger version, but cruder because it's expensive. But it's interesting to try to push it up into that size.
These are rocking my world, man. These are fantastic.
Come on. And they want to become these kinds of things. These aren't built, but they want to get there. And these. And these.
Life is good.
That's my brain. That's my brain. I had my brain scanned with fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. Took the data. There's my brain. Hello, how do you do? That's inside. That's inside with some structure. That's inside as a rendering that we could build. And there are hundreds of these. But instead of just showing you these, I want to show you a little more.
Life is rich and full, ladies and gentlemen.
Life is something else. Okay, so we saw this. We can dismiss it, can't we?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, so let's dismiss this one.
Although I love it that it's already powdered. And like most fabs work on powdered substances, so you've got like a particle animated thing that just it's already sort of pre-powdered.
That's a key point. If we had 2.5 hours, I'd show you that exactly, and maybe we can get the wine in here, like I said, and we could do that. But
all
good things must come to an end.
All good things must pass, but let's not pass this up, because, okay. Let's get this up and running. If we're lucky, all I have to do is...
Hopefully Marcus's brain isn't going to crash violently.
Oh well. No, this is my brain in a state of emptiness, but it is my brain. And you know, it's a low polygon version of my brain so that I can run it on my laptop. If I had a faster laptop in a few years, it'll have more things. And when it does, it'll also have the powdery stuff as the activation of my brain when I'm actually looking at something that causes me to think it's beautiful, because I'm trying to figure out where the locus of beauty is. When we say something is to our liking, something says that. What is it? Okay? So
I hope you recognize you just saw the panelist's brain, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Can we have a round of applause for that, please?
Now,
it was his brain.
Now, what I said is I want to make it alloatomic, and I don't want to have that division between the inside world and the outside world. And I really like that we gave, or you gave the awards to the things that crept out. And for a long time, I've been talking about immersion, bringing immersion going in, immersion coming out. So some movies are in order. I hope it's entertaining. First movie from the Venice Biennale of 2000, where I was here in Italy and I was representing Greece, and I made some invisible sculptures with limited sensors. Oops, need sound. So I'm sculpting. I've sculpted these strange things, and there are these forms that you can't see. They're made of infrared light and reflection. They're kind of like Brancusi birds, and I can interact with them. I can find them in space and trace their contours. This is the other view of it. So there are 5 of them. They control a virtual world. It's all liquid. One of the pieces in the world becomes extruded into a 4th dimension, a 4th spatial dimension, and then gets brought down as these forms, which we've already seen as that big thing that Bruce liked so much, and we also saw it as a virtual world, a silvery world. So they have all these registrations of reality. Okay? But the point of this thing is invisible architecture and invisible sculpture. Now, the reason for that is because virtuality is beautiful in how it changes, and when you bring it out, it just dies, right? And so the question is, how do I bring the virtual out? And I can bring it out as a dead thing, which might be a beautiful sculpture, but it's not alive, or I can bring it out as light, in which case I can't see it, but it's still alive, right? So there's a kind of play, and they're both part of the piece. I mean, they tie into one another. It's not like I don't want one or the other. It's like Sophie's choice. You want both. But where I'm trying to take this now is actually here, where this is just recently in Graz. I'm at this point in the Institute for Electronic Music, and this is Gerhard Eckel who directs it, and he has a motion capture system in the room, and he's holding a sensor. And what I've done is I've arranged it by this sort of alloatomic thinking that I can't quite lay out unless you ask me to. I've arranged it so that around him is initially a semi-dome with a space inside it, a thickness of a wall, and outside. And he can touch it with the sensor. There's a form in space, you just can't see it. And then once he establishes that, I can sculpt it into all these strange forms, and I'll show you. These are things that are best shown, because when you say it to people, they say yes, yes, and then they drink their wine and forget.
We could all be so lucky, really.
Yeah. Soon, Bruce.
Soon, yes.
Red. Okay, so
is this a bat he's got there, like a 3D motion capture handheld?
It's a little infrared light reflector gizmo. That's Keanu Reeves texture mapped on this for kicks from The Matrix.
He's acting better than he normally does.
Well, he's on a ball. He's having a ball. So here he's figuring out that, yes, it's there, and we can track it. If we can turn the volume up, it'd be better. Up more. It won't go up? That's not the volume I have. So then, I'm just going to skip forward. You can see that what's on the screen, I hope you can see, But what's on the screen is a lot more complicated now. There, we turn the lights out. And that shape, that form is now in the space, in that fluid manner, and he can still touch it. I mean, it's a three-dimensional sculpture that's liquid and changing, and it's actually right there in the room to the sensor. If there is no sensor, of course, there's no
interaction.
Of course. But you know, if you're deaf, you don't hear music. It's unfortunate, terrible even. But that's how
So
it
this is a sonic architecture here.
No, it can be anything you want. It can heat your clothes. It can put pepper on your tongue. You know, it can put whatever it is you want it to do. You know, because it's only numbers, and it can get filigreed. He's still touching it. That's why it changes color.
How is it going to put pepper on my tongue, Marcus?
Because there's going to be a pepper dispenser in your bionic tooth, Bruce.
Okay, good. I'm glad we have that crucial interface issue ironed out.
So here it's become these shards, and this isn't shown there, but we can fine tune it, and we fine tuned it to the point where it was the frequency was as high as, say, the texture on the chair, and if you just touched it, nothing happened. But if you dragged your hand on it, so you had form and texture through some translation, but it was there.
Right.
Now, I would argue, I would take this sense of things and say that, okay, I wanted to make it atomic. I wanted to coexist in virtual and actual space as a kind of continuum. I wanted to connect it to biology, and I want to connect it to Louis Beck's world. And so I want us to create organisms, allo-organisms. It's not literal.
Right.
That thread their way through both these spaces that are now one, and through anything else that we want them to. And I don't care what we call it. I don't care if we call it architecture or music or whatever you would like to call it. I think it's more interesting to just put it in the world.
Have you ever seen the film that was based on H.P. Lovecraft's horror story From Beyond? It's about living creatures that inhabit our space that we're not aware of, and
is it the one about the chair?
You see it with a pineal
Is that the one with the
gland.
chair?
I don't remember if there's a chair in it, but sort of horrible creatures whom our senses have hidden from us. Manifest themselves when he stimulates his pineal gland. You're getting really close to that territory here, Marcus.
So I mean that doesn't really distress me. There was a story about a living chair. And you might remember who it was. I've forgotten who the author was. But the chair, actually it's a creature that can take different forms, and it becomes the chair.
Right.
But it's fallen in love with the person. And he spurns it. He kind of scorns it and tries to get up. And the last scene is that the chair is biting his leg. Because it's become this other thing. It's kind of...
Yeah.
It won't...
Hell hath no fury,
like
a chair scorned. Yeah.
So, there's more to this story, but I think this is a good place to stop unless we don't. So here goes. Ready?
This really should be the last one, Mark, as entertaining as this is.
ある朝あの子がやってきた一目で彼女にドキドキその夜彼女の夢を見た一体これは何なんだ命くん命くん生きてる牛乳苦手な命くん半分代わりに飲んであげるあなたの唇感じたい初恋の味はどんな味命くん命くん生きている命くん秘密の花園そこにある覗いちゃダメですいけませんでも本当はちょっと見てみたい胸の痛みがシャラララ命くん命くん生きている
Got some awesome Murakami action.
That's Takashi Murakami. It's a sculpture. It's in it's in museums and stuff. And I think it's really good because it raises these issues. I mean, it says that we're going to do this. We are doing it. It's going to be messy. It's going to have problems. But it's also delightful. It's not necessarily Frankenstein. It's not necessarily scary. That's another sort of Western take on technology, that we should be scared of it every 5 years or every 18 months, I guess it is now, isn't it? Every time there's a new something, we have to be terrified.
With Share Festival, it's every year, ladies and gentlemen.
All right.
Just once a year, and I really think we have to stop.
Okay, we're stopped.
Thank you. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you, Share staffers, for your excellent work. Thank you, Chiara, Simona, Manuela. Thanks very much, Luca. We are done. Let's drink.
Let's drink.